Welcome to the Solid Verbal.
Come after me! I'm a man! I'm 40!
I've heard so many players say, well, I want to be happy. You want to be happy for a day? Eat a steak.
It's that woo woo.
And now, Dan and Ty.
National Signing Day. Dan Rubenstein, it is once again upon us. It is a little different. A little different. Since all this portal stuff and NIL stuff started going haywire, I got to admit, it's lost a little bit of the luster for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, part of it, too, is you can take earlier and earlier summer official visits, right? So it's players getting to campus early and earlier and becoming more familiar with coaches and schools and facilities and just the environments and experiences, so that we were getting a lot more early commitments as coaches shift their own focus come late fall, early winter to the portal and holding on to the class, holding on to current rosters. So I don't envy the position of coaches, but certainly in terms of dramatic swings come late December or early February, we're getting a lot less.
We're going to bring our friend Brandon Huffman from 247Sports back on the show here momentarily to talk through the big storylines of this here signing day, how the transfer portal has reshapen the way some coaches approach signing day and high school recruitment as a whole bunch of stuff that only Brandon knows and only Brandon can offer to the Verballerhood.
Yeah. No, I like that he has this under lock and key. That, like, he is one of the accountants that has all the Oscar winners in the briefcase. Like, only Brandon has this very specific, mysterious insight.
That's the way we treat him on this show.
I agree.
He is royalty. Brandon Huffman will be with us momentarily. We're also going to do some dude alerts. We're actually going to ask Brandon for some dude alerts.
Yeah, why not?
This time around, because, you know, we're kind of like in this position now where we're calling out dudes, and there aren't a whole lot of games that have taken place in bowl season. But certainly as we go through the recruiting process, there are some dudes of which the Verballerhood must be aware moving forward. So we'll talk to him about that. I'm also going to read out some of our favorite reviews that came in over on Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, it's like an early warning system, right? Whenever there's like, oh, there might be an avalanche. Oh, there might be a volcano. Shout out to our friends in Iceland. Hope everybody's all right. I assume you saw that?
I did. Crazy.
You're very geologically aware. If
Always.
Anybody says otherwise, I will fight them.
Yeah, no.
So Brandon is taking advantage in our very specific context of the early warning system about recruits that I think he is more than positive we'll call it at least like all conference caliber players.
That's right. All right. So if you're listening to the show, make sure you hit subscribe or follow on your podcasting app of choice. Going out to Apple Podcasts, leave a star rating or review if you have yet to do so. We appreciate your support. We will continue to keep folks updated on the status of Winter Wonders as that game progresses. We had over 1,800 entries in that, Dan. Just a great group of Verballers who are in it to win it. And, of course, last but certainly not least, going out to Verballers.com. It's where you get the ad-free content, the bonus episodes, Discord access, what have you. Just go out to Verballers.com and check it out. Should we bring in Brandon?
Can't wait.
All right, Dan, let's bring in our good friend, Brandon Huffman, the national recruiting editor for 247sports.com. Here's the kind of guy Brandon Huffman is. This is clearly the busy season for him.
Yeah.
Yet every year graciously volunteers like an hour of his time to make the Verballerhood a little bit smarter with all things recruiting and portal and just all this fun stuff that's going on this time of year. Mr. Huffman, we are pleased, we are honored, we are excited to have you back. How are you, good sir?
I'm good, guys. Thanks for having me back on. I was getting nervous. I hadn't been asked to come back. I thought, you guys were processing me and telling me to go put my name in the portal.
Oh, man. We couldn't imagine. We couldn't dream of it. We should add title-wise, Ty. Brandon is also somebody who humors my questions about who's tampering with who. Not that any team would ever tamper with anybody.
Never.
But hypothetically, if there were tampering happening at any sort of major program across this great land, Brandon speculates, potentially, just hearsay, and always humors my questions. So
advanced recon, is what I like to call it.
Due diligence.
Advanced due diligence, just, helping my guesses become more educated.
I like that.
How much of that goes on?
A lot. And it's happening. I mean, I'm not going to, pick on Riley Leonard or Notre Dame, but I'm going to use his as an example. He goes into the portal, and within minutes, everybody says Notre Dame. He has the do not contact.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm not I'm just using that as an example. Sure. When a guy has a do not contact and everybody already knows where they're going, it tells me it's not tampering. Back channels are being contacted. Back channels are being, there's a lot of loud noises being kind of done behind the scenes. And I think it goes on. I mean, Dan and I were texting months ago about Cam Moore potentially going in the portal. And then boom, immediately he goes in the portal. Jake Dickert, almost to the day he goes in, knows that it's coming. So
right.
It's clearly enough that coaches know it's happening. And, I do laugh at the coaches that come on and they go on these rants. I mean, yes, did Pat Narduzzi lose Jordan Addison? Did he tamper? Probably not. But I guarantee you that there's people at Pitt now that are probably doing their own advanced recon. And so these schools, if you notice, the tampering accusations are becoming quieter and quieter
right.
from the Power 5 schools because they know that, hey, we got guys that are following recruits that are following players that are an FCS school, at a G5 school. Why would a random director of player personnel at some Power 5 school be following a kicker at Montana or a punter at North Dakota State?
Premium content. They just want that premium social content. Yeah,
absolutely. We just want to know what this guy's doing with his daily life.
Yep.
Or does it have to do with the fact that, hey, you know what? We need a punter. We need a kicker. We need a linebacker. If I follow him, this might make him go into the portal. So guarantee you that's happening.
Yeah. Well, look, I put a call out on social media for questions, and it's clear that one thing is on the tip of everyone's tongue. This, of course, being recorded the day before the first high school recruiting signing day in the 2024 class. It is that slow integration of the transfer portal into high school recruiting, kind of becoming one big monster. And we joked about it before we hit record here, that is this the most boring signing day that you've had in a long time because of all the portal activity? Like, shout out to Drew and Gordon and Lobo Jangles and Autzen Dome and Dan Smith and many others on Twitter and Instagram and wherever else on social media who asked a version of this question. But like, did the portal kill high school recruiting as we know it?
It did. I mean, 2 weeks ago, I'm in Nashville today this week for our signing day show. I was in Nashville 2 weeks ago for Portalpalooza, and that day was hot. That day has become what the first Wednesday in February used to be and I wouldn't even say it's because of the early signing period. I'd say the portal has completely transfixed what coaches are doing in November and in December. And, if you guys remember when the early signing period came and then the push to official visits in the spring, there were a lot of schools that were anti-spring official visits. They didn't want to have to be on campus in June hosting these guys. Now, these guys are pushing kids, come in June, come in May. We can't afford to have you here in November, September, or November, December, because we have to go re-recruit our own roster to keep them here, go recruit somebody else's roster. So now 90% of the heavy lifting is done in the summer. So that way in the fall, now it's all about the portal. And I think part of that is, the diehards know who Jeremiah Smith is. The diehards know who Dylan Raiola is. But Portalpalooza, everybody knows who Kyle McCord is. Right. Everybody knows who Dante Moore and even Cam Ward is. So the casual college football fan is much more intrigued by the portal, but it also means college coaches are much more intrigued. It's why you look at Major League Baseball and the NBA and NFL. The first day of free agency, everything goes crazy because I know who that linebacker for the Packers is, but I'm a Vikings fan. I'm not really a Vikings fan, but I'm a Vikings fan. I want to go sign him. That's how college football fans look at it, and that's how coaches look. The draft is great. You still need the draft, but we also can, fill some of these gaps in free agency. And that's where we're at now in college football. We're like, yeah, signing day is cool and all, but we can really fill these spaces with the transfer portal. And then you have 3 Heisman finalists that were all out of the transfer portal. You're going to see that continue to trend that way.
I guess this sort of answers my next question, but I'm curious more specifically how coaches have altered their strategy around high school recruiting in this portal era. And then as maybe like a follow-up to that, to what end has the strategy from prospects, their mentality, been altered now in this portal era? Like, part of me always wonders, is this a made-up narrative for podcast dorks like Dan and I? Or is there some real movement happening with strategy, with the way that the prospects of tomorrow approach the recruiting game as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, my job is to cover recruiting, and it's gone from covering recruiting as a high school kid to now we're having more coverage of the portal, and those guys are, I guess, considered recruits. But we used to joke the day after signing day was National Unfollow on Twitter Day. You signed, I don't have to follow you anymore. Right. We move on. Now you follow them because they're going to be in your DM 6 months later, 9 months later, saying, "Hey, I'm in the portal. Can you put a story out? Let people know that I'm in the portal." I got to cover their second and third recruitment. And so if I'm having to do that, just covering recruiting, you guys are having to talk about it, just covering college football. Now you think about what these coaching staffs are, and this was kind of. At the time, it was sort of newsworthy, but it wasn't a big story yet. But remember when Nick Rolovich was hired at Washington State, he hired a director of transfer recruiting at Washington State. And that guy's job was, when we thought transfers, even in 2020, before COVID, we still looked at it more like the JUCO guys. And at that point, transfers still had to sit out a year. Unless you got, Tom Mars as your lawyer. If you transferred, you were going to have to sit out a year unless you had some, dying relative that was close to home. And even though that they were only 990 miles closer to home, the school you were leaving was 1,500 miles closer to home. Tom Mars would go Tom Rinaldi with the NCAA to get you that year of eligibility. Well, now with the one-time transfer and the immediate eligibility, coaches know I'm going to lose guys, but I'm going to gain guys. So they have shifted their focus. I'll talk to schools, Power 5 schools, that they'll get 15 commits. Like, yeah, we're done. We're not taking anybody else unless an elite guy out of nowhere drops into our lap. We're going heavy portal. And you see when you have situations like, I'll use a good example, UCLA a year ago. They were done and content with their recruiting class in, October, November. Dante Moore falls in their lap. Obviously, that went really well. But UCLA has been so portal heavy that they took Dante Moore because he fell in their lap, but they still brought in Colin Schlee for a visit. They ended up having, I think, 14 transfers, and they had 15 guys sign. And you're seeing a lot of schools have that mentality like, hey, we're just going to go get the absolute no-brainers that we're good with developing or that we think can play, immediately, but we'll just go get guys out of the portal. And, we didn't sign a quarterback this year. That's all right. We'll go get 2 out of the portal now. And part of it, I was talking about this earlier with one of my colleagues here. With NIL now being something not just that every school is offering, but every player is expecting it, coaches are like, well, why would we go invest X amount of dollars on a high school kid that is unproven? We can use those same resources to get a kid that's been a 2-time All Big Sky player or a 2-time All Mountain West player, but needs to be at a Power 5 school. Let's reallocate those resources from a high school kid that may leave after a year because he's got that free transfer. Or we'll go after a guy in the portal who's now using his one free transfer. So he can't go anywhere. So we got him for at least a year or two. Let's put our resources that way. So it has completely changed how colleges approach their recruitment. Now, not everybody. The Alabamas, the Ohio States, the Georgias, they're still going to go heavy high school. And then they're going to be very selective and picky in which players in the portal. But for the most part, most schools have had to completely reshape how they do recruiting and how they recruit high school kids, because it's now, hey, you know what? As a high school kid, we'll take you, but maybe you are better off going to Akron for a year or to Colorado State. And then we'll see you in 2 years after you've been a 2-time All MAC or 2-time All Mountain West kid. Then we'll bring you to our level and we'll throw in a little bit of extra stretch along the way. That's where we're at in 2023.
It's grad school, right? You're an underclassman, and then you go to Georgia, Florida State, Oregon, USC, wherever to get your graduate degree and show out on the biggest possible stage.
I had one FCS coach tell me this 2 years ago, and he said it kind of in jest, and then his program started to get kind of pillared by it. But he said, we become the new JUCO. We are now the schools that we get the players that the big schools didn't want, and a part of that's because of a numbers thing. Now, there is a part of me that wonders when COVID classes are completely done, when guys like Michael Penix and, the Cam McCormick's, that COVID year doesn't count. Will we get a recalibration of rosters to that point? But the other side of it is FCS schools and G5 schools have actually recruited better than they had in years past because Power 5 schools are taking less players. So those guys are falling down a level that maybe they could have been Power 5, but now they're going to a G5. Maybe those G5 guys are now going FCS, but then those G5 and FCS schools are saying, we're getting these kids for 2 years. He's balling. Now everybody's hitting up his high school coach or his trainer, and we lose this kid after 2 years. So you can imagine what that's doing to junior college recruiting. But now the FCS and G5s are the new modern era JUCOs. Go there for 2 years, prove that you bet on yourself,
Right.
prove it, then transfer up.
Who has done, program-wise, coach-wise, whoever, who has done an especially graceful job in a non-graceful industry of balancing high school recruiting, convincing high school recruits to stay 1, 2, 3 years to develop if they want them, and sort of very quickly said, it's not going to work out here. We don't want to waste your time. Maybe you should look elsewhere. Bringing in portal guys who have been significant contributors. Who has done that sort of roster and cultural graceful juggling, perhaps on a level that others haven't or haven't yet?
I'm going to say from a big standpoint, like one that everybody knows about, is Florida State, and I think that they've been able to get some real talent upgrades, especially at the receiver position with Cleon Coleman, with Johnny Wilson, even Micah Pittman was there for a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that they've done it in a good way, and obviously they're in the mix for Cam Ward. I think Mike Norvell has handled it very well. He's done a good job. Jared Verse is one of the best defensive players in college football, and the guy was at an FCS school, and now he's a future NFL first rounder at Florida State. I think that they've done a fantastic job of balancing it, because Florida State is they have right now the number 3 recruiting class in the country in 2024, but they're still in the mix for portal guys. And so I think they've done a really good job of using the portal to their advantage, but not going full Deion Sanders and bringing 40 guys in, or even like Lincoln Riley did when his first year at USC. I think they've done a good job of balancing. We have needs to fill at certain positions, but we still want to, at the end of the day, realize we're in the state of Florida. We can recruit the Southeast. We can recruit the state of Florida. We can get into Texas. We can recruit nationally. I think that they've done well, but kind of the one school that was like a sneaky good one, and it wouldn't be one you think of, but it was Oregon State. And now things have changed with Jonathan Smith leaving, but when he first got there, that was right when the portal opened in 2017, 2018. And if you remember, his first couple classes were heavy with transfers. You had Tyjon Lindsey, you had Tristan Jebbia, you had a lot of these transfers. They went heavy on the JUCO. By the end of his time there, they were getting guys like Aiden Childs, like Damian Martinez. They were doing really well with high school recruiting. They had kind of the quick fix that they needed, but then started getting more of their attention focused on high school kids and develop them. If you look at Talais Fuanga, who was probably the best offensive lineman in the Pac-12 this year, not named Troy Fautanu, Talais was a guy that I watched him play in high school. I remember going to a game of his, and I paid my son. I was on the field. My son was in the stands. I paid him to film this kid. He calls me after the 4th series down the field, "Dad, he hasn't blocked anybody. Can I stop videotaping?" I'm like, "Sure." Now he is the consensus All-American offensive tackle. Oregon State developed him. They had him there for 4 years and then turned him loose late. And I think that that's where Jonathan Smith did such a good job at Oregon State, because, they got a DJ. They had, players that came in as transfers that flourished, but there's a lot of guys that they just developed. And they went heavy on the portal to get the quick fix, but they also went heavy on who are some developmental guys. And if you look at their roster this year before it got annihilated, Anthony Gold was relatively under-recruited. Ketan Oladapo was a walk-on. Josiah Irish, another kid that wasn't heavily recruited. Jack Velling, when Oregon State offered Jack Velling, nobody was after him. And then down the stretch, he ends up having Michigan and Washington trying to get him. And I think that's, if you're a Michigan State fan, that's something to be excited about. But the Georgia, the Alabamas, the Ohio States, they're not using the portal heavily. They're just using it for key spots. I think Florida State's done the best job of the best of both worlds. And, there's a reason they have an undefeated season. It's because of that balance of portal guys and high school recruits.
What's the state of recruiting right now in Florida with the big 3? Obviously, I think the number 1 overall prospect in Jeremiah Smith, committed to Ohio State at the time we're recording this, is, a kid who jumps off the screen for everybody. Florida started out super strong with this class and has sort of fallen off, and more and more rumors of players leaving that class. You mentioned Florida State and the quality that they've done. Miami, an uneven job on the field this year. I think they just had a huge running back flip and have recruited nationally, if not regionally, really well under Mario going up the East Coast. What are the narratives during this cycle within that state?
College football is so much more entertaining on Twitter when the big 3 are recruiting against each other. And they handle it with such maturity and grace and class, and it's beautiful to see. If I'm a Florida State fan and I see Miami gets a kid, oh, well, you got the John Ruiz discount. If I'm a, Miami fan and I see a kid go to Florida, okay, have fun winning for Sunbelt Billy. If I'm a Florida fan and a guy goes to Florida State, oh, have fun not going to the playoffs. Like, the narratives between those three had never been louder because all three are recruiting at a much better level at the same time than they have. It was hit and miss during the Manny Diaz years or the Al Golden years. With Florida State, Willie Taggart he couldn't get out of his own way at times. Jimbo kind of would focus in on guys early on, and then he'd get a few guys, but then there was also head scratchers. Florida has had, for a school that's as successful as Florida's been, Dan Mullen was allergic to recruiting. He was this, Southeast Chip Kelly. Oh, why recruit? I'll just coach him up. Now you have three coaches that are ramping up their efforts recruiting wise, but the biggest thing that's changed is they're not just focusing on the in-state kids. Yeah, they all want Jeremiah Smith. They all want to flip him. But Florida's biggest recruit right now is DJ Lagway from the state of Texas. Miami has recruited nationally since Mario got there. I mean, they were recruiting nationally to begin with, but they really focus nationally since Mario got there. Florida State, obviously, Mike Norvell has some West Coast ties. This is the fifth class in a row, I think, that he's been there, that they've got a West Coast kid in their class. It's not the headliner of their class, but he goes into Georgia, gets KJ Bolden, who is the top defensive player in the state of Georgia, and goes toe-to-toe with Kirby. I mean, remember 2 years ago, before Travis Hunter committed to Jackson State or flipped to Jackson State, he was a Florida State commit from the state of Georgia that Georgia wanted. So we're used to a time. I mean, if you've been following college football for years, like the three of us have, we're used to the three Florida schools recruiting the state of Florida, and that was it. There might be a rare unicorn like a DJ Williams or a Dan Kendra or a Joe Mauer that they might go
Lorenzo Booker. Yeah.
Lorenzo Booker. Hey, stand up 805. There would be the occasional West Coast kid, but they wanted to have 90% of their class from the Sunshine State. Now it's like, oh, well, these Florida kids want to leave. They want to go to Georgia. They want to go to Bama. We'll go recruit the national teams too. And because those three schools have the chops to do it. I mean, who would have thought, Dan, you and I texted about it back when Jaden Rashada, that Miami and Florida would be having a bitter recruiting battle over a quarterback from Oakland, California. What a world we're in, but that's where we're at in 2023. Those three schools are now recruiting nationally when they never really had to before because there was so much talent, but that's how global, so to speak, college football recruiting has become.
Let's talk about Dylan Raiola. I put the call out on social media again for questions. Shout out to Ryan. Shout out to Jared. Shout out to everybody who sent in questions about Dylan Raiola. Dylan Raiola originally committed to Georgia. Dylan Raiola flips his commitment to Nebraska. It's a big deal. He's a top recruit in this class. He also announced his commitment via a poem, which I did run through a checker. It was not generated by AI. So good on him for penning that, or his people penning it, whoever did it. Creative, if not a little bit puzzling. But the move to Nebraska is certainly notable for Matt Rule. We got a lot of questions about where this stands with respect to other notable flips that we have seen over the last 5 years. I would also add that I went through the prospect, I guess, advanced scouting that you've got out on 247, Brandon. And I noticed that there was a line in there about maybe needing a year or two of seasoning before he's ready to step in. My hunch is that he's going to step in right away. So is he plug and play ready for Nebraska? Where does this flip rank relative to others that we have seen recently? And to what end does this impact a school like a Georgia, others that maybe were in the running to get Dylan Raiola's services?
So I'm going to answer that in about three different ways. One, Dylan, you're no Shel Silverstein. I'm going to age myself a little bit.
That's good. Light in the attic.
I light in the attic,
where the sidewalk
ends. Yes, I'm aging myself, but it was a poem. I don't even know how else to describe it. Very unique. Remember, he was also committed to Ohio State at one point too. Yeah. He was committed to Ohio State very early in the process, and they end up flipping Lincoln Kienholz. At that point, I think Brock Glenn was committed for the 23 class. Then he parts ways, ends up with Georgia, even though Georgia already had Ryan Puglisi committed well before Raiola did. Matt Rule, was it 2 weeks ago, started coming out with hard numbers of what it'll cost you to get a quarterback. And I've said that on this show before. When Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban had their war of words a couple of years ago, it wasn't so much, they're you need to spend this much money. When Ryan Day said, you need $13 million for a class, it was a call to arms to get their boosters.
It wasn't
on
targeted
board.
to the public at all.
No, it was targeted 100% to their boosters to get their butts under the collective and make these things happen. With Nebraska, he is going to be a plug-and-play option, but probably more like a requirement. Their quarterback situation was a disaster this year. You buy yourself some time a little bit when you have a true freshman quarterback. I think it's earlier in your career as the head coach there, you might buy yourself some time rather than in year 6 or 7 trying to go with the true freshman, because by then the fans are tired of your excuses. But when you're Nebraska and you're now getting a legacy who, keep in mind that's a big thing with Nebraska. It's if his dad doesn't play in Nebraska, if his uncle doesn't play in Nebraska and now coach in Nebraska, Nebraska's not even sitting at the table, let alone getting him to eat from their banqueting table. He is going to Georgia, or he is going to anywhere else in the country that would want him. But Nebraska has that legacy pull. So he's going to buy Matt Rule another year of time. He's a true freshman. If he has mistakes, he's got all the talent in the world. The transition shouldn't be huge for him because of the physical talent, because he's a very smart, cerebral kid. He's grown up around the game. But a true freshman is still a true freshman. And, look no further than Dante Moore. I mean, we have famed quarterback coach Chip Kelly bringing him in. Everybody thought it was going to be sweet, wonderful music, considering what Chip Kelly had done with Dorian Thompson-Robinson from year 1 to year 5. So naturally, Dante is going to have that same success, but he's more talented. And then everything fell apart. So when a talented coach has a talented offensive coach has a talented quarterback, and that doesn't work because a true freshman is still a true freshman, that's the position that you're in. And you look at, a guy like Bryce Young, a CJ Stroud, they waited their turn. They didn't play as true freshmen. They were established starters. On the flip side, where did Jaden Daniels rejuvenate his career? After he transferred, when he started as a true freshman. Bo Nix started as a true freshman. I mean, Bo Nix almost hurt himself by, sorry to bring this up here, Dan, that game against Oregon in his college debut to win that game. He set the bar so high that, this is what's going to be like everywhere. Well, he still was a true freshman by the end of that season. And then you have multiple coordinators. So that's the thing. I think Nebraska fans thinking that this guy's going to come in and be Tommy Frazier or be, one of those, a Scott Frost quarterback, not Scott Frost, the coach, but have that ability to come in and, do what Trevor Lawrence did at Clemson, do what Jalen Hurts did at Alabama. I think you need to understand that those guys were kind of unicorns in the sense. Trevor Lawrence was a generational talent. Hurts was obviously very good, but he also had a generational defense backing him up. So, yes, do I think Raiola has the talent? Absolutely. Could he use a year of seasoning? Absolutely. And the thing is, Nebraska is now bringing him in, and those fans are going to be calling for him to start the second they take their first snap of opening game next fall. Is he ready for that? It all depends on who's blocking for him and who's catching passes from him, because that is still what the ultimate kind of a judge of a true freshman quarterback is does he have to do everything by himself, or does he have some talent to help kick the training wheels and take those training wheels off a bit? That's what I think, he's going to need. But I don't think that Nebraska is going to be willing to be, and when I say Nebraska, I don't mean the coaches, I mean the fans. They're going to expect him to come in and be the dude the second he steps foot on campus, given his ranking.
Broadly speaking, completely separate from the transfer portal, which I think we've discussed at length here, has sort of overshadowed the old high school traditional method of getting guys on campus. What are the storylines for you? What are the big storylines for you this high school recruiting cycle that people should know about?
I think one of the most interesting things is this is that first year in a while where conference realignment does really have an impact. Who are the schools making a move from a conference where they've been comfortable and sitting in that conference for years, and now they're having to recruit against bigger boys because, and I'm looking at Oklahoma and Texas making that move from the Big 12 to the SEC. Oklahoma and Texas were king in the Big 12. Didn't always translate to wins, for Texas, and Oklahoma couldn't ever get over that playoff hump of getting in and losing in the first game. But now you're saying, we're in the SEC. Well, yeah, coach, so is Alabama. So is Georgia. So is LSU, and they're now recruiting me. You're now going to have a more difficult time recruiting your own state because now those kids are like, oh man, these SEC schools are coming after me. Yeah, Oklahoma, Texas are SEC schools, but now if I'm in, Enid, all of a sudden the idea of going to play in Athens, Georgia isn't so crazy because my parents can still see me. We're going to come to Oklahoma every year. We're going to be playing in this part of the country. And then, Dan and I have talked a lot about the Pac-12 schools moving to the Big Ten. Right now, you can convince me Oregon is the only school recruiting as if they're ready for this move. USC kind of was, but they're losing a lot of guys. They're losing guys to the portal. Washington, they're doing heavy portal rather than going heavy lifting in high school, which is strange considering the last 2 years that they've had. You could go and recruit high school kids because you are a hot name. And then UCLA, nobody knows what the hell they're doing recruiting wise. And, this is year 7 of asking the question, what the hell are they doing? Right now, UCLA has the 17th rated class in the Big Ten, and they're sandwiched between Northwestern and Michigan State, who both had off the field issues firing their coaches. And they were trailing. I mean, UCLA's in year 7, going into year 7 of Chip Kelly. So there's no excuses. Not like there's any questions about the job. There weren't, at least coming into the season. And how are these schools that are making these moves to these new conferences prepared for it? And right now, if you look at Oregon, they've got Aiden Breland committed, the top D lineman out west. They've got Elijah Rushing committed, the top edge rusher out west. They're the heavy leader for Jericho Johnson, the number 1 player in Northern California, who's a D tackle. Oregon is doing a fantastic job on the offensive line and the defensive line to make that move to the Big Ten that much more player ready. And Oklahoma and Texas both have top 10 classes. They're ramping up. I mean, they're spreading their wings. Texas is kind of like the Big 3 in Florida, where they don't just recruit their own state now because they are kind of national. You look at the players that they've gotten in Sark's connections to the West Coast and where he's recruited. These schools are doing a bigger and better job of recruiting nationally. Oklahoma, Texas are ready. Oregon's ready. USC acting like they're ready. Washington's ready from a portal standpoint, but that's what I'm watching. How are these schools and yes, there's even the Big 12 schools that are moving, or the Pac-12 schools going to the Big 12. Not as remarkable. That's not, Colorado and Utah and Arizona State going to the Big 12 is not the news-shattering news like the Big 10 schools inheriting the 4 Pac-12 or the 2 Big 12 schools going to the SEC. But everybody kind of had to ramp their own recruiting game to be prepared for that new conference. That's, to me, the biggest storyline of anything is who's ready for this transition, who's not ready.
Something fascinating to me within the SEC as well, I noticed, and it's a little unexpected to me, but it's a great thing if you're a Georgia fan. Kirby Smart's recruiting nationally in a way that I think a lot of people wouldn't expect, not because they don't think he's a good recruiter, but I think that the general line of thinking is he's so close to so much talent, right? In Georgia, Florida, the Carolinas, Alabama, but he's almost doing, and I know this is hearsay for some, like what Pete Carroll did, right? We're like, we've built this program up to such a huge level that the Georgia brand is now so widespread and so known that we're going to go into Illinois, we're going to go into Iowa, we're going to go into California, we're going to go into Arizona. And when you look at the number of states represented in this class, it looks like a Notre Dame class, right? It looks like somebody that has to recruit nationally, where now Georgia can be choosy about who it wants in the Midwest, on the East Coast, on the West Coast, in the Southwest, whatever. And I think Kirby just hired Dante Williams, who obviously is super connected on the West Coast. Is this something you saw coming? Do you think he's being especially savvy about it? What is your view of where Georgia recruiting is obviously in an incredible place right now?
Dan, it's funny because you mentioned Pete Carroll, and I had somebody tell me this, that, back when Pete had it going on, USC wasn't even recruiting anymore. They were evaluating.
Right.
They were going to get the kids. It was just a matter of did they get the right kids? And they had those legendary classes early on. Then they had some classes where, the evaluation might have been off, but they were after the Vidal Hazeltons, the Antoine Perez's, and some of those guys never really did much at USC, but everybody in the country wanted them. So it was a matter of an evaluation, but they showed up. That SC logo was on a coach's chest. Boom. They were getting them. There would be guys that were the number 1 or number 2 player in a recruiting class for one school, and USC would make them the 25th best player in their class. Here we are in 2023. That's where Georgia is. I had a trainer tell me this. He had taken a couple of his players down to Athens during the summer. He's like, dude, Kirby's winning at least 5 more national championships. They have become what Alabama was. And I'm like, let's, pump the brakes there. Alabama is still really darn good. And then obviously it played out this year. But the point is that Georgia doesn't even need to recruit anymore. Georgia just needs to tell you, we want you. And if you want to go play there, you'll go there and you'll flourish. I mean, you look at their 2 tight ends a year ago. You had one from Las Vegas, the other from Napa, California. You'll remember John Boyette. I mean, he was the last great player to come from Napa. That was in the late 2000s. All right. So it's not like Napa's a hot spot for athletic talent, but Kirby knew, go to the West Coast. We're cooking. We're this close to winning a national championship. Let's go get a Brock Bowers. He might be the difference. Let's go get a Kendall Milton. He might be the difference. We're still going to recruit the Southeast, but we've got the credibility and the chops to recruit nationally. And that's one of those things that other schools are like, crap, can't you just recruit your own region? If you're a West Coast school, if you're a USC, if you're an Oregon even, can you just stay in your own lane? Can you stay out of the West Coast? Let us have the West Coast kids. Let us keep those kids out West. No, now those kids are going to Georgia. Ernest Green, starting to tackle for them this year. St. John Bosco. I mean, there was a time where if you were at Bosco, you went to one of 3 schools, really. You went to SC, you went to UCLA, you went to Oregon. All right, now Bosco's best players are going to Georgia. They've got a couple that are committed to Alabama. Modern day kids are Nate Frazier, the top running back in the state of California. You would have thought Nate Frazier, that's a kid. I mean, he's going to Oregon. He's going to SC, 2 schools that have recruited modern day. No, he's going to Georgia. Roderick Robinson out of San Diego last year was committed to UCLA. Georgia pushed up. Boom. He goes to Georgia. That's the impact. If you're a school and you're like, hey, we got this kid. We love him. Oh, crap. Georgia's interested in this kid. Now he's recruiting him. What do we have to stand for? They have good NIL, but more importantly, they have good NFL preparation. And, I'm not at all, Georgia fans, I'm not at all comparing Kirby to John Calipari. So I want to make that very clear as I make this comparison. But remember when Calipari first got to Kentucky, everybody said, oh, well, he's only getting these guys because he's paying them. And obviously Kirby was getting all the accusations thrown. But then it became such a factor. You go to Kentucky, you're going to the lottery, you're going early. Georgia, it's like you go there, you don't even need to be a starter until your last year. And Alabama had that. I remember when Rashawn Evans spurned schools and went to Alabama knowing he probably wasn't going to start till year 3, ends up starting in year 4, goes in the first round. Georgia's at that level now. Kendall Milton doesn't leave. He knows, hey, I just need to get, DeAndre Swift out of here, all these guys out and get my opportunity. And when I do, now I'm an NFL guy. Georgia's not even recruiting anymore. Now they're just picking and choosing who they want.
Who's winning battles unexpectedly? Obviously, Georgia winning a battle is not especially surprising, but you look at, I think there's a top 5 overall player going to Mizzou. I think he's local to Mizzou. Williams. No, I don't know how you pronounce his last name. I'll get
Molinari, yep.
Yeah. Who's winning battles, not sort of, over punching or whatever, but like who has done a really good job of building a class, keeping a class, fighting off bigger programs, and looks to be securing something pretty interesting for the future?
Yeah, I mean, we don't. There's no like Texas A&M or the old Sesame Street thing of like one of these is not like the other.
Right.
Like how does Texas A&M have this generational class? I think there's 2 schools that kind of are remarkable in the sense that you're not used to them maybe being rated so high. Auburn has always been kind of on the fence of like, are they serious? Do they want to be serious about recruiting? Well, then you bring in Hugh Freeze. And speaking of the school that was the one of these kids not like the other, who could ever forget the legendary 2013 Ole Miss class? Yep. And, the talent that was in that class and obviously the famous tweets that came as a result of that. But, Auburn has done a really good job in this class. Flipping Cameron Coleman from LSU was huge. He's an elite receiver. They're still trying to, they're still in the mix for a guy like KJ Bolden. So Auburn has done a really good job that we're not used to seeing him because, again, under Brian Harsin, they couldn't get out of their own way. With Gus Malzahn, it seemed like everybody hated Gus that was donating money to the Auburn program, even though he was, pulling out some really good seasons. But now they're recruiting at a high level. But then the one that just kind of, this isn't the school in that state I'd expect. It's been South Carolina. And it kind of went last year when they were able to get Nicholas Harbor, who was just this freak of nature unicorn, big athletic edge rusher who thought he was a receiver, thought he could play tight end. And South Carolina, like, dude, you can play whatever the heck you want. Just come here. Well, then they followed it up in 2024 by getting Dylan Stewart a top 15 edge rusher from the DMV area, and holding on to him. And I really like what Shane Beamer has done in a recruiting standpoint. And I mean, you could see the passion in which he's recruiting and how he coaches. And now it needs to just continue to translate on the field to get some wins and not be mediocre when you have a quarterback like a Spencer Rattler. But those are kind of the two schools in this class that we're not used to seeing be ranked as high as they are, that happen to be ranked relatively high, because then you kind of go through the list. It's the Georgia, the Ohio State, the Alabama, the Florida States, Texases, the schools that you kind of expect, the Oregons, the Penn States, they're all kind of there, LSU. But then you kind of have the South Carolina, Auburn. You're like, oh, okay, well, welcome to the party, guys. If you start to recruit at a high level, then that probably bodes well. And the irony in all that is South Carolina here, they have like a top 17, 18 class. It's like this 8th best class in the SEC. So you can be good on a national scale, but in your own conference, you still got some work to do to climb up that rank.
How close are we to you or anybody who covers recruiting publicly talking about recruiting in a fantasy football type, almost like a GM way, where like they're really spending on receivers? Like, ooh, interesting that like they're putting all their money in the offensive line pot. Like, ooh, they've already like spent a bunch on edge. I don't know if there's money left on the cap for them to spend something on corner. Like, as things open up, and obviously there's like an NCAA pitch about, centralizing everything within the school. Like, are these conversations you have behind the scenes talking about how different teams and collectives are budgeting?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember when I first started covering recruiting, the recruiting director was usually your special teams coach or your running backs coach, who his job was to get recruits and running backs, set up junior days, your director of football operations. Those two were the two that did recruiting. Now you've got schools that have, a director of player personnel, a director of recruiting strategy, a director of the director of creativity for recruiting, a director of, transfer recruiting, a general manager. You've got entire front offices being built into recruiting staffs. You look at schools that have a general manager and they're essentially handling all the off the field stuff, which is recruiting, which is essentially being capologists. And I was having this conversation with one of my coworkers recently, like, with all due respect to those people that know how to do financials, the Theo Epsteins of the world are going to find themselves with jobs in college football sooner rather than later, because as you're having to balance what your collective is making available and how you're going to distribute that money. Is it going to be an even distribution? Is every player getting $30,000 in a bike? Or does your starting quarterback get 1.5? Well, we've only got 20 million to work with. We've got to allocate these funds appropriately. So you're going to have somebody that's literally their entire job is financing, and it's being an accountant. So I guess a lot of it depends on how soon we get there. If the NCAA, which seems to be powerless more and more lately, can establish a way for NIL deals to be public, because that's never going to see the light of day if the schools have anything to do with it. They don't want that information public. They want to be able to use it, for their own edification. Right. And that's part of the reason so many NIL deals sound so screwy, is because you have people, well, he's getting $3 million, it's $3.5 million. Well, those numbers aren't coming from the schools. Those numbers aren't even coming from the collectives. Those numbers are coming from NIL agents who are trying to ramp up the intrigue in that player. I spent a year working for Scott Boras way back in the day. I know all about, bidding teams against themselves. Oh, well, the Boston Red Sox are going to get Bernie Williams X amount of dollars. And the Red Sox we never made a deal. But George Steinbrenner doesn't want to lose that. So I'm going to give Bernie $5 million more. Well, now we're doing that in 2023. And, Jaden Rashad is going to get X amount, so we're going to give him Y amount. Well, those schools are sitting there going dude, that's not even the money. We don't even have that much money in our collective, nor do we have that much money for the next 3 years in the collective. But there's somebody internally who has got his Excel spreadsheet wide open, allocating that money. And there's going to be a point where the school, being control freaks that the schools are, they're going to take that out of the collective's hands and say, we're just going to hire somebody internally to manage all of our finances for what our allocation is going to be. And, there's going to be a director of financial strategy that's going to show up. I mean, if we're going to be honest, let's see, Alabama's probably going to find it. Theo Epstein's going to get fired or retire. And we all know that he goes to the place where all recovering coaches go to have their career rehabilitated. Theo Epstein, Alabama Crimson Tide staff.
Why don't you do that? Why don't you take that job?
Yeah, why don't you do that?
You know, I was told there would be.
Is that your golden parachute?
I was told there would be no math, and you know, I'm a great father, I think, but I'm a terrible one. My kid comes to me and says, "Dad, can you look at my algebra homework?" I'm like, "Dude, no, I cannot. I can proofread your essay, but do not make me do math."
All these big GMs have a capologist, Brandon.
Yes, I could be the GM. I can't be the capologist, but the GMs too. It's fascinating because you're now seeing schools, you know, and this is kind of a sidebar to that, but like you're now seeing schools that GM, he is telling the coaches, this is who you're offering, this is who you're recruiting. Whereas the coaches say, oh, I got to watch the tape. I don't really like them. I don't want them for my room. Now, a lot of these position coaches are being told by the GM, this is who you're recruiting. This is to the level of which you're recruiting because I like him a lot. He can't play in my room. I didn't ask you if he could play in your room. This is the running back that we want. This is what we're willing to do to get him. And this is how hard you need to recruit him. And so that GM role is very appealing and it's very intriguing. You're going to start seeing more and more schools naming a GM, and he is going to handle all the off the field, all the non-game day stuff. And he is going to be managing and dictating what that roster looks like. And that's just another step along the way that the college model is becoming very much the pro model.
That's right.
So anytime anybody invests a lot of money in anything, whether you're investing in stocks, whether you're investing in real estate, if you're investing in a car, if you're investing in vacations, whatever, you invest a ton of money, 6 figures, 7 figures. You want to see a quarterly earnings statement. You want to see due diligence. You want to do all of the research you can possibly do to make sure your investment is going to pay off. What type of investment are schools now making, especially in bigger recruits? Obviously, there's more known about portal players, but bigger high school recruits, they were just like, look, we're not going to spend $1 million on this edge rusher because by all accounts, he's not a good kid. He's not trustworthy, or he's lazy, or his mom is terrible, or his dad is terrible, or his trainer is terrible. Like, what are the types of due diligence involved with a 5-star receiver, a 5-star quarterback, a 5-star left tackle? And is it way beyond where it's been because of, you know, now it's an investment in a way that it's different than it was. Obviously, there's always been money around top kids, but like, what is that type of behind the scenes now decision making around like, look, he's a great edge rusher, but like he would be terrible for us.
There, you know, 10 years ago, it was always, oh, well, he's chasing the back, so he was a fit issue. He wasn't going to fit in here because what he wanted and what we offered were not going to be the same thing. Well, now with every kid having the opportunity to get NIL, that excuse is thrown out the window. So now it's a matter of, are we doing a deep dive? Are we vetting who this kid is and who the people around him are? Or are we just chasing the fact that he's a 6'5", 250-pound edge rusher who can run the 40 at 4.6, and he's, you know, we're chasing stars. He's rated high because he looks the part, he plays the part, he has all. We don't care what the off the field is. We can take care of that. We can fix that.
Right.
Every coach thinks that, you know, they're this part psychiatrist, part psychologist, part, you know, child life specialist. They can make the kid fit the square peg into that round hole. Every coach thinks that they're the one that's going to change this kid, but
it's not their money.
It's not their money, and that's the thing.
Right.
And so now you're seeing the schools, they're coming back and they're saying, wait a second, we gave X amount of dollars to this guy and we got no return on the investment. And, you know, look no further than Ohio State 2 years ago. They got Quinn Ewers. He wants to skip his senior year because he wants to get paid. He goes there and then he leaves, and the Ohio State boosters are said, we're going to give him X amount of dollars. They don't have a quarterback now. They're in a situation where that hurt quarterback recruiting in subsequent years because of him. And what did Ohio State get out of that? They got Kyle McCord leaving after an 11-1 season. They got Devin Brown wearing number 0 or whatever number he's wearing. He's wearing some weird number.
144.
Yeah. It's a very unconventional. It's like a spring training pitcher number. And you're complaining because you can't get a quarterback in the portal. Well, you allocated your funds the wrong way. And I mean, the biggest school is Texas A&M. They threw so much money, and then guys were leaving even after last year, before Jimbo even got fired. And I would love to be at a stage in life where I have so much go to hell money that I'll be like, oh yeah, here's another $5 million. Go get me a good pass rusher. Go give me another left tackle, because I really need that pride on those Sundays in the fall to brag at the country club about what my team did. And it's just like, and I've always been fascinated by how academia, with professors and with athletic directors and school presidents. They claim to be the smartest people in the room. That's why they're running a university. How they could be so often taken to the woodshed by Jimmy Sexton and offer these horrible deals that screw the school, and they have to pay them $90 million to go away. And I need to call my boosters and say, hey, yo, can you hook us up with about $30 million for this buyout? Oh, by the way, can you also get to the collective? Because we need another pass rusher. We need somebody to block our quarterback's blind side. We also need somebody to catch passes. So when you're sending money to this account, make sure you're sending it to this account. Now I think schools are getting like, listen, you go get your money for the buyout that you offered, that you said you're going to get. Go get that from the TV money that you're now getting from ESPN or CBS or Fox.
Right.
I'm not donating money. I don't care about our banquet room or our weight room or our training table. I care about getting the best players. And I remember hearing this in January of 2022, getting kind of a going rate chart. Left quarterbacks, like they are in the NFL, were getting high paid. There was a time where the quarterbacks went to a school because of the quarterback development, the chance to go to the NFL. They weren't getting paid. It almost seemed like, oh, well, a quarterback went there because he wants to play. They weren't getting paid. Now quarterbacks are commanding, millions of dollars, whether it's high school, whether it's the portal. You got edge rushers and left tackles that are kind of 2 and 3 in how much resources are going towards them. So we're now at a point where schools are like, hey, if I'm going to be spending money, it's not for buyouts. It's not to get my name on a plaque outside the football facility. It's going to this collective because we need a talent upgrade. And I'm not giving that coach another cent that's going through his paycheck. I'm giving it to these players because the Jimmies and the Joes are the ones winning, not the guy calling the X's and O's.
Let me dive in a little bit to some of the specifics on the, at least at time of recording, 24/7 team rankings. Notably, 15, 16, and 17 are Clemson, Michigan, and USC. 3 teams I would posit we're not used to seeing that low in the rankings. Obviously, 115 other teams in the country would be thrilled with that level of standing on the recruiting rankings the day before this all goes down. But how deeply should we read into any of those? Clemson being at 15, a smaller class. Michigan, normal size class, but maybe lower than we'd expect. USC, we alluded to earlier, not really sure what the vision is there, but there's a lot of portal activity. Where is your level of concern or least concern with respect to those 3 schools with where they're at right now?
Well, I think if there's a concern, it's that Michigan really hasn't tried to dive into the portal as heavily as other schools have. And obviously Clemson, we've gone over that ad nauseum in that, Dabo is insisted on not using the portal and not trying to get that quick help. It's developing the players that his school recruited. Whereas USC with Lincoln Riley, this guy had success at Oklahoma with transfer quarterbacks each and every year. His most successful quarterback that I think he recruited as his own player was Caleb Williams, who ended up following him as a transfer. So USC has kind of dug their heels in saying, we're going to recruit the portal. So them being in the 18th, and they're also, there's some fallout with Domani Jackson going to the portal, Malachi Nelson going to the portal, Corey Foreman. I would imagine he's at some point going into the portal. There's some lingering players that they got that they inherited when they got there that they're maybe losing. So they're kind of focusing more on the portal to get more immediate playable players because they're losing sophomores and juniors. Clemson is one of those that maybe this is finally the year that Dabo realizes you've got to dive head first into going into the portal. But Michigan, it's clear that whatever that they're doing there at Michigan is working. Now, I know Ohio State fans are saying, well, we know what they're doing that's working. But whatever Michigan has been doing, and part of that is, Harbaugh doing a great job in evaluation and developing. And he's really not losing a lot of his assistant coaches unless they're, making moves as a coordinator somewhere or taking head coaching positions. He's done a really good job of holding on to the staff, and there's that continuity and then replacing those assistants with good assistants. When Clemson was losing their offensive coordinators, they were just replacing them internally. And so those players weren't getting any better. So it's like, okay, well, if that's not working, you've got to recruit better. But if you look at those teams that were winning national championships for Dabo, they weren't necessarily top 5, top 10 recruiting classes. They were 15 and 20. It was, going in and getting a no-name safety out of the state of Kansas who then becomes a star for you in your national championship team. Yeah, they did get a Trevor Lawrence. They got a Deshaun Watson. They were getting, really good elite players, but not a full collection of them. They were doing a great job of evaluating them and then developing them. So Clemson was winning kind of with this same method, but now they've got to evolve and be ready to have those playable players coming in. Michigan, they went heavy recruiting early on when Harbaugh was there. When he first got there, man, they were, I remember there were rules that were literally being passed recruiting wise because of Harbaugh. Whether it was spending the night at, one of the recruits' house, climbing up a tree for another kid, having a satellite camp at Antioch High School just to get Najee Harris and, spending essentially a 4-hour in-home visit. But then it was like, okay, well, Ohio State's getting all the buzz. Even Penn State's getting more buzz. So Michigan's just going to be about development. They're going to go get players. They're going to go after kids, but they're not going to dance with the kid all the way till the end if he's going to have drama around his recruitment. They'll go get a guy like a Jaden Davis. They'll go get, some of these players like a Gatlin Bear, a Colston Levin that are low maintenance, really good football players that are going to fit in well instead of going and chasing after these kids that want all the drama surrounding. And so, I think when you look at those three, they all have different models. So seeing them in that back part of the 20, given their success on the field or given their proximity to so much talent like it is with USC, it does make you scratch your head, but it's worked for Michigan. It hasn't worked all that well for USC of late. And Clemson, well, we all know that they need to evolve, and that's probably going to be more on the portal side than on the recruiting side because the recruiting strategy hasn't strayed much.
If you're betting money right now, we're recording this mid-December, who's starting quarterback for Ohio State in 2024?
Whew. That is a good question. I mean, it's the easy answer to say Devin Brown because isn't the Peach Bowl on January? No, maybe it's in December because I was going to use the easy answer there.
Technically
on a
speaking,
technicality,
wow.
But I think they're in December. I'm going to throw this one out there, and I got to see this kid in San Antonio last year. He was committed to Washington, relatively unremarkable because he came from South Dakota. Ryan Grubb did a great job of identifying him, and then you just watch him climb up the ranks, and there's a lot of positive buzz about Lincoln Kienholz, who Ohio State flipped from Washington a year ago. When I saw him in San Antonio the first few days of practice, it was a huge jump going from South Dakota talent to the All-American game. But then in the game, even though his team got destroyed, he actually had some plays where you're like, okay, now I see it. Now he's got that year of development at Ohio State. He's sitting behind, Devin Brown and Kyle McCord, which means he's going up against that elite defense in practice every day. He's going up against the Tommy Eichenbergs, the Lathan Ransoms, the Jack Sawyers, the JT Tuimoloau's. That's going to prepare you better than, maybe playing against Central Michigan or Akron on a Saturday. So I'm gonna throw that one out there. I wouldn't be shocked if Lincoln Kienholz becomes the guy at Ohio State in time for the 2024 season.
We're going to hold you to that. So we'll be back in touch at some point. Notre Dame's class.
That said, I do want to throw one caveat in there. I have not heard a specific name. I have not heard a name, but I have heard buzz that there is still one more major name that's still to fall in the transfer rumors. They're not doing it yet. They're waiting it out, but there's another name that's potentially going in the portal that would be the ultimate big fish. I mean, we have Aiden Childs as a big fish. There's another name. I haven't heard the specific name, but we can cause rampant speculation. There was a quarterback who played at Ohio State, and when I say played, he was on the Ohio State roster for a year, who decided he's coming back for another year to run it back at a school in the city of Austin. Well, there's another quarterback there. Malik Murphy just left.
Okay.
There's another quarterback there that is in Austin. I haven't heard this name, but I'm just doing the speculation because the educated guess is what do we call it? The advanced recon.
That's right.
I'm not saying that this name is going to Ohio State, but when I hear there's another big fish to drop, and you start looking like, well, who could that big?
Who are
fish
the big
be?
fishes? Yeah.
I wonder if if I arch my back a little bit and look a little bit closer, we might see a name.
You're only a
That's
man. Right. By the way, to echo what Ty was asking, what does Notre Dame's next coach have in the 2024 class this year?
I'm not sure what Luke.
Sorry,
Fickell
Ty.
No, it's fair.
I don't know what Luke Fickell is going to do with those guys.
Yeah, Luke Fickell will have them going. Yeah.
At Notre Dame. I actually like Notre Dame's class. I think what's been interesting is CJ Carr has stuck with them. I mean, when he committed to Notre Dame, Tommy Rees was the offensive coordinator. A year later, Gerard Parker is the offensive coordinator. By the time he gets to campus, Gerard Parker is not even going to be there. There's going to be a new offensive coordinator. their receiver class from a year ago looked really good with Rico Flores and some of the receivers that had come in. Well, Chancey Stuckey gets fired, and Cam Williams, Logan Saldati, they're sticking with Notre Dame. So I've been kind of impressed that Notre Dame hasn't lost, despite some of the turnover they've had at coaching. They haven't lost anybody. So I think, whether it's Marcus Freeman, Luke Fickell, or some other rando that ends up becoming the head coach there, I think Notre Dame's done a really good job. Chad Bowden is the director of recruiting at Notre Dame. He's done a fantastic job in keeping this class together and doing well. And, you can't ignore Marcus Freeman's energy. And when you see the way he recruits, and, I got to imagine he kills it on the in-home visit with mom. I mean, they probably are just like, oh, yes, I'm sending my kid to you. And they've done a great job of recruiting. But even Notre Dame, a school with as difficult academics as it has, and granted, they're getting their transfer from a Wake Forest and from a Duke, but even Notre Dame realizes that they had to evolve, and they are going into the portal and grabbing players. They got Bo Collins, who was at Clemson for the last couple of years, to come in. They understand that, they need some quick fixes too. And especially with losing, I think they've lost 4 receivers into the portal. They're realizing, okay, well, we got to get some talent now, and then we'll just turn our attention to the 25 class. We have our new receivers coach. We're going to have a new offense coordinator. Let's dive deep into 2025, and let's maybe backfill some of those guys with portal guys. So, yes, whoever the new Notre Dame head coach, if it's not Marcus Freeman, there'll be some talent there to work with.
Great.
Ty, you can ask an Oregon recruiting question in the snarkiest way possible. That's
no.
Fair.
I wanted to circle back on something I said earlier. I mentioned that Dylan Raiola was the top-rated quarterback. He is not by 5/10,000ths of a point, Brandon. He is second on your 247 official rankings behind Julian Sayin, who is committed to Alabama. Why the 5/10,000ths of a point difference? What does that entail in practical terms?
So a lot of that is because of the composite. And so when you take kind of the average, as the composite does, where it takes the big 4 recruiting sites and it kind of averages out to like, okay, this site has him as 91st overall. This one has him at 92nd overall. Julian Sayin is higher on some other sites. We have Dylan Raiola higher than most sites. In our own specific ranking, we've got Raiola just ahead of Julian Sayin, but that's how close this recruitment, that's how close this ranking was. And it kind of reminds me a few years ago of when you had Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. Like, depending on where it was, both those guys were clearly the top 2 quarterbacks in that class. And it was just a matter of one site liked one more than the other. And they were, that close to each other in the final composite rankings. Last year was fascinating because you really had 4 guys that were kind of in that discussion with Nico Yamaliava, Arch Manning, Dante Moore, and Malachi Nelson. But this year, it's like Sayin and Raiola have so established themselves as the top 2 that, with the All-American games coming up, Julian Sayin's playing in the Under Armour game. Dylan Raiola was playing in the All-American Bowl, but he's now just going to do the Polynesian Bowl, much like Nico Yamaliava did last year. So the final ranking and, what ultimately could determine those 5/1000ths of a point will happen in 3 weeks after the All-Star games. But those 2 have gone back and forth. I'm a big Raiola guy, but I love Julian Sayin. And I think Julian Sayin's senior year, and just given what he's done, I mean, I don't even want to say it's 1 in 1A. I mean, it is 1 in 1.0001. Like, that's how close they are. And you can see by how close they are in that composite ranking that the industry's kind of split on who the number 1 is and who the number 2 is. And that debate won't get settled from a ranking standpoint probably until the middle of January.
Ty, the difference is California vibes, by the way. If that's what the 5/10,000ths of a point, it's the California vibes, brah.
And not just that, San Diego vibes. Those are worth extra points.
Top tier.
Did your algorithm guy over there yet start trying to figure out a way to integrate the portal with high school rankings? Like,
we do. So we actually came up with that about a year ago. You can now see when you click on like team rankings, there is now a way to get the overall rankings.
Okay.
So you have,
I'm looking at it now.
Rankings. Yeah. If you click recruit, you can just get the high school recruiting rankings. You can get the transfer rankings. So that's where Colorado and Ole Miss are at the very top. And then you have the overall, where it includes the better part of both the portal and the high school rankings. There's only a certain number that is counted, like the top 25 guys in a class are counted. But yeah, we had to start doing transfer rankings, and you'll have players that were maybe a 5-star coming out of high school that their career has not been great. So they're a 4-star trending towards a 3-star. You may have had guys that were, 2 stars or 3 stars coming out of high school, and now they've been awesome at whatever school they were at, and now they're 4 stars. So it's kind of giving you a chance to recalibrate those rankings too. But that's where we're at. We had to start ranking transfers, and we had to start factoring them in to the team rankings, because schools, believe it or not, all these coaches that are going to get up there on Wednesday and say, hey, we don't care about rankings. We don't ever look at the website.
They got this bookmarked. They're on it.
Not only do they have a bookmark, they have people that are making calls all the time saying, hey, man, our guy's rated too low. I can't believe you guys have him rated too low. But you said stars don't matter, coach. Well, if they don't matter, then tell your SIDs to stop including the position rankings and the overall team rankings in those press releases that are going out. Oh, and also, maybe don't have in your contracts anymore, assistant coaches. I get a $30,000 bonus if my class finishes in the top 25 on 247Sports or on the other websites, which a lot of those contracts now do. But again, they don't
cash those checks. You know that, Brandon.
No, exactly. All goes to charity.
My emotion of the past month has been pretty low, watching Oregon lose not once but twice to Washington, in large part, I would say, because of Washington star power. You look at Rome Odunze, you look at Michael Penix, Dylan Johnson in the Pac-12 championship game. Oregon is a team that seems like it is recruiting on a very high level, looking for their stars. They closed very strong last year with Mateo Uiagalelei and briefly Peyton Bowen before he pinballs between Notre Dame, Oregon, and Oklahoma. Where is the star power in this year's Oregon class if they are going to make that move to once again get over on Washington and hopefully thrive, if you're an Oregon fan, in the Big Ten?
They have done such a great job in the front 7 in this class, and they may not be done. I mentioned Breland, I mentioned Elijah Rushing, but they're still heavily in the mix for Jericho Johnson. I would say they're probably leading for Jericho Johnson. He'll announce on Thursday. When you're in a region like Oregon is, where there's just not, and this is nothing against the state of Oregon talent, this is the entire West. I mean, the West is not what you would consider a hot spot for defensive linemen. So when there are elite defensive linemen, you want to get them. Oregon's on track to land 3 of them. The top 2 D tackles in the region, the top edge rusher in the region. So their star power is right already up there with Aiden Breland, and it's with, Elijah Rushing, Braden Platt, who is the top player in the state of Washington, an elite middle linebacker, top 5 middle linebacker. And they could close with Jericho Johnson. Then you flip it over to the offensive side of the ball. They've already got commitments from some good offensive linemen like Jacquan McCoy they're trying to hold on to. They aren't completely out of it for Jordan Seaton yet. I mean, I know he committed to Colorado. I know schools are still trying with him. So if there is going to be some late drama, it could end up being with a guy like a Jordan Seaton. But then I think a guy that's kind of a sneaky good pickup. And again, we mentioned how, the FCS and group of 5s are the new JUCO. There are still some really good JUCO players out there. So what do? They got the number 2 JUCO player in the country in the 2024 class, Sione Lalea, out of the College of San Mateo, same school that Mekhi Blackman played at before he went on to Colorado and then USC. It's been a program that's done really well, sending players to Oregon historically. I believe George Moore played it at College of San Mateo, and guys that were instant impact, Evan Williams or Bennett, whatever one of the Williams brother didn't transfer from Fresno State, played at CSM. When you're going up against some of the receivers that Oregon's going to be going against in the Pac-12, in the Big Ten the next couple of years that are at Washington, at USC, at Ohio State, you can go get a 6'3" corner like a Sione Lalea. That's one of those sneaky good pickups that maybe doesn't get as talked about because he is a JUCO guy. So we're not seeing him at a bunch of camps. We're not seeing him at a bunch of events. But if Oregon, can close the deal with Jericho Johnson, if they can, flip Jordan Seaton, and then the big fish, the highest rated player that's uncommitted anywhere right now, is Gatlin Bear, the number 35 overall player in the country out of Burley, Idaho. He was committed to Boise State, and interestingly enough, he was in Eugene for the USC game the weekend that Andy Avalos got fired, was in the office with the Oregon coaches when Avalos got fired. Boise State lost him. He decommitted. It's down to Oregon and Michigan. He's an elite track guy. He's a 10-100-meter guy, but he's not planning to do track in high school. And then the other caveat with him is he won't even show up on a campus until 2026 because he's leaving to take his LDS mission starting in February. But he'll sign in 2024. So if they can close with Johnson, with Bear, they can flip Seaton, and maybe there's that other last-minute surprise that ignites the victory cigar. Oregon kind of establishes themselves again as the premier recruiting program out west, but that's got to translate onto the field in beating their arch rival who have gotten over on them, like you said, those last 3 times.
On this show, we do, good answer, by the way. On this show, we do dude alerts over the course of the season, just guys who have performed exceedingly well any given Saturday. If you had to wager your own money, and I'm begging you not to, when you look at the class of 2024, who do you keep coming back to? Who are the, I guess, three magnets to you where you're just like, this guy is obviously going to be at least an all-conference performer. There's no universe in which this guy is healthy, that he's not thriving as a college football player anywhere in the country.
So I'm going to pat myself on the back and go back a few years ago where we were still doing my 5 stars at 24/7. And only one man was brave enough and bold enough. And, you know, people might say, well, he didn't do much in college football, but he went number 1 overall. And I said Trayvon Walker was going to be, he was my number 1 player in my personal 5 stars, ended up being the number 1 pick. So I had 3 years in a row where I had Trevor Lawrence, Trayvon Walker, Bryce Young as my number 1 guy. All 3 went number 1. All right. So Trayvon Walker wasn't a huge, I mean, he was a top 10 player. Last year, my guy was Caleb Downs. That was the one guy that after watching him in San Antonio, I'm like, this kid is going to be a star. And knowing how hard it is to start as a true freshman in the secondary, which is Nick Saban's baby, that was even more impressive. So if I'm going to go back to a guy this year that I think is going to be just a special player from the second he steps foot on campus, it's Ellis Robinson. And seeing him, he's the number 1 corner in the country, the number 3 overall player. Seeing him this summer on the 7-on-7 circuit, I mean, he is what you design a corner to look like. He is my favorite defensive back in probably the last 3 or 4 years, or specifically corner. I loved Downs. I like Ellis Robinson ever so slightly more. He's a guy, but I'm a big man. I'm a guy that if I'm drafting a team,
you used to be a lot bigger. You're looking lean and mean.
Thank you. You know, I'm trying to get that 5th year of eligibility as an inside linebacker instead of as a nose. I would almost always say I want a big man. I want a lineman or a tackle. But I will tell you this right now. Jeremiah Smith is the best receiver that I have seen in person, on film, on tape, on everything that I've seen. The last receiver that I saw that I watched him and go, this guy is special, was probably the 2008 class, the very first year of the Under Armour game, where I had to cover the Under Armour game, and the practices at Under Armour were right next to each other. And I was whipping my head around watching Julio Jones and AJ Green. And it was a matter of, until Julio got hurt later in the week, a matter of anything you can do, I can do better. Watch this. We're going 15, 16 years back. And there's been obviously some phenomenal receivers in that time. There's no doubt about it. But it's not often that the number 1 overall player in a recruiting class is a wide receiver. That's how elite and how special Jeremiah Smith is. And what Brian Hartline has done at the receiver position, recruiting-wise, since he's been there, has been nothing short of remarkable. You know, you come in the first year there, and you get you inherit Garrett Wilson, you have Chris Olave, but then you go and you get a Julian Fleming, and you get a Emeka Egbuka, then you get a Carnell Tate and a Brandon Ennis, and you get a Jackson Smith and a Jigba, and those were all 5-star elite special players, and they're all going to take a back seat to Jeremiah Smith if he ends up signing there on Wednesday, because this is the best high school receiver I've seen in a decade plus. This guy is a flat out. Oh, I didn't even mention Marvin Harrison, because he wasn't a 5-star. He was a high 4-star. And obviously he's very good. But Jeremiah Smith is kind of like a composite of every best attribute all of the Ohio State receivers have been the last 5 years, all in one player. I know that sounds hyperbolic and maybe a little bit exaggerated. It's not. That's how special a player he is. And he is my major dude alert. I mean, cue the music, because that guy deserves
So he's just,
it.
It's the fluidity, it's hands, it's speed, it's in and out of breaks. It's like just a finished product with size, like checks every box.
And he does it quietly. Like, he's not the guy that's going to go out there. There is no Ocho Cinco in him. He's not the guy that's going to go out and tell you he's going to beat you. He is going to beat you. And then after the game say, yeah, that's what I did to you. Like, I remember seeing him in 7-on-7. Guys were talking trash to him. He didn't say anything, and then just went out there with like seeing red and just obliterated this corner. It was like, I'm going to get off press, I'm going to chuck you, and then I'm going to go run a 40-yard pattern, and I'm going to catch a touchdown, and then I'm not going to celebrate. I'm not going to go jump in the foam pit. I'm just going to look right at you and say, yeah, you thought you could cover me. And it's the complete package of speed, power, strength, hands. I mean, I wouldn't even say he's raw. He's so technically sound, so technically advanced as a player, but then he's got all the physical tools on top of it. You have some guys that they're just they're very smart. They're very crafty at the position. They kind of have, those X factors, but they may not have that elite physical trait. Or you have the guys that have the elite physical traits, but they're not necessarily great route runners. They aren't the most consistent pass catchers. Jeremiah Smith is like kind of everything all rolled into one. Like, if he isn't a superstar in college, I will be absolutely stunned.
Ringing endorsement from our good friend Brandon Huffman of 247Sports. Brandon, what are you up to over the next 24 hours? What is the next week looking like for you, and where can people find your work?
Yeah, you can tune in. We're going to be online all day on Wednesday on the 247 Sports YouTube channel from 10 a.m. Eastern time until 5 p.m. There's going to be, 2 years ago, we had the Travis Hunter news that shocked the world. Jeremiah Smith, I just talked about him. Those schools are not stopping. Florida State and Miami aren't stopping trying. Dylan Raiola was already the big fish, but, we're tracking. Are there going to be some late flips? Jeremiah Smith, KJ Bolden, are those going to be it? But we're going to be covering all of that on Wednesday for 7 hours. And then we're tracking, where are these portal guys going? Where, because of the calendar with schools starting at most of these schools the first week in January, there's a lot of portal guys coming off the board so they can get enrolled, get themselves admitted, and move to campus that first week in January to get started. So we'll be tracking the portal just as heavily as we will be tracking recruiting. There's 4 players in the top 100 that are uncommitted on the day before. That's unheard of. There were days where the top 5 players, 4 of them were uncommitted. So the intrigue might not be there in terms of who's going to commit to a school. It might be more who's going to flip from a school. So we're tracking that. We're tracking the portal. You can find it all on the 247 Sports YouTube channel. You can follow me at Brandon Huffman, and I'll be providing up-to-the-minute kickers transferring from one Pac-12 school, an ACC school, to another Pac-12, Big Ten school, because that's what the people want. They want to know where these kickers are.
Absolutely. It's true. Brandon Huffman, thank you as always for your time. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks, fellas.
All right, Dan, there you go. Brandon Huffman, 247 Sports. I think it will be a great career track for him. Not that he asked. Great career track for him to become one of those GMs of whatever program makes sense to him.
Yeah.
Why not?
So he said no math. So that eliminates an element. But you can
hire a math guy.
I think what you get from Brandon is essentially you get a top flight bloodhound. And I mean that in the best possible way, where you're like, I don't know, something seems off with this kid, or like, ooh, this guy's definitely a winner. He's just a winner. And like, you get that sort of, like the different kinds of evaluators in business where there's just like the sixth sense. I think Brandon has that je ne sais quoi, Ty, where he's just going to be able to go in there and tap into something given his experience. Get the golden parachute, go take Georgia money, Alabama money, Ohio State money, and you just get him in a room with a bunch of recruits and be like, nope, not him. I think that's the move. I think you're right, Ty.
I think that's the move. Look, make sure you go on out and follow Brandon on whatever your app of choice is. Brandon and the team over at 247 do a great job keeping track of all things transfer portal, high school recruiting. You and I, Dan, will be refreshing that website about 1,000 times on Wednesday. So we appreciate, as always, Brandon giving us so much of his time. Again, in the midst of his busy season, it's kind of wild that I feel like we've done this for the last 10 years now with him. It's just wild to me that keeps coming back, keeps finding the time for us in the Verballerhood, and hopefully we're all a little bit smarter for it.
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
Because your name is on the show.
It is.
For now. Mm-hmm. Where are you right now with college football fandom as it relates to portal, recruiting, signing day, the social media back and forth of like, oh, this portal guy's visiting this school, or like, oh, this is a flip candidate. Like, I think the conversation we had is accurate, where it's just like, it just feels very different right now. But where are you personally with Notre Dame, Penn State, and national college football, and how you follow it this time of year?
Yeah, it's not a Notre Dame or a Penn State thing. I am completely transfixed by the transfer portal.
Okay.
It has captured my imagination. What can I say? I am but a simple college football fan like the rest of you. And to Brandon's point, the names you know mean a lot more than the names that you don't. Jeremiah Smith could be the next Jerry Rice for all I know.
Sure.
And from the sounds of it, he might well be on his way to doing that. But I care a lot more about Kyle McCord. I know Kyle McCord. Or Julian Fleming. I know Julian Fleming. Or Riley Leonard. Or, any of these names that we've discussed over the last couple of weeks. That to me is a lot more meaningful because I've seen those guys. I know what those guys did at their previous teams. And the, I guess, possibilities of going to a new situation, unlocking a new level of achievement for whatever player. That to me is very interesting. So obviously these names are of particular importance. If you're a Nebraska fan, I think you probably care a lot more about Dylan Raiola than you do, the latest and greatest transfer.
Right.
But from my standpoint, just from our standpoint, I think we see the numbers, we get the tweets, we read the emails, that type of thing. There definitely seems to be a lot more juice in the transfer portal from the perspective of the common fan.
Yeah, I agree. And it almost is seen, especially at a lot of the top schools, like, yeah, of course we're going to have a top 10 class. Like, that's the minimum if you're a Texas fan, if you're an Alabama fan, a Georgia fan, Ohio State, whoever. Whereas the portal almost seems like more of a referendum on where your program is in the hierarchy of the program. You're like, why would this clearly good defensive back, why would this clearly good South Carolina or Mizzou or Minnesota, why would this clear high-level Power 5 corner who has the choice of anywhere he wants to go, why would he choose your school over my school? That doesn't make any sense. Can't he see who we've developed? Doesn't he want to win? Does he want to play in the playoff? That to me seems like it's become the new battleground, also because of the scarcity of clear top flight guys in the portal. There's a couple dozen. Right, there's a lot of guys. There's a lot of hope. There's a lot of hopium being injected throughout this great college football land. But it seems like the scarcity of clearly proven guys who can operate at a high level, it becomes such a referendum on program health that it seems like that's where the battles are right now. The true battles, because recruiting happens over the course of years and years. All these guys they want to get it over with at this point, where there's something new and fresh about the portal and the battles there.
I think that's all right. Yeah. Write in solidverbal@gmail.com. Let us know your thoughts on the matter. But just judging from the amount of feedback that I got when I put out the call on social media for questions for this episode, everybody's got the same question. And I think everybody's feeling it too, even if they didn't come out and say it, that it is just different now in a way that we could not have foreseen. When the portal became more of a commonality in college football,
right?
I think we were asking ourselves, is it always going to be this way? Because this was on the heels of COVID, NIL starting up, becoming more of a thing. I don't know if we could really project forward that it would still be as hot as it is a couple years now down the road. And I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. I think, if anything, it's going to only intensify. And to Brandon's point, to some of the ones that we've already made here on the show, it is definitely going to alter the way that coaches strategize and look at their big boards when it comes to recruiting. It's really just kind of integrated into one big thing that if you're smart, if you're Florida State, as Brandon said, who has balanced it well, you can use both to your advantage.
Yeah, I think all that's right. And it's probably for the best if there's any sort of unintended consequence, or maybe intended consequence, to the portal taking some of the signing day shine off. It's that it's probably for the best that we don't have the brightest possible spotlight on a 17-year-old who changed his mind on signing day and receives a torrent of hate on social media. It still happens. It, of course, still happens. But in the same way that, we'll see a signing day schedule of this guy's announcing at 7 Eastern, this guy's at 7:15, this guy's at 7:30, and we have these hat ceremonies, and we have Clinton Dix's mom. That's who it was, right? She was disappointed that he was choosing Alabama over LSU. Maybe I got that wrong. I apologize if I did. But it's probably for the best that a little bit of that energy has been transferred away from the younger recruits and potential Georgia Bulldogs, Texas Longhorns, Oregon Ducks, whatever.
Hey, if I'm a coach, I definitely value having tape on whoever for a year.
Yeah, of course.
Playing at the FBS level. I value that over almost most of what you're going to find on the high school level, because you can't compare the competition. Probably not getting as good a tape. I mean, just across the board, it is not the same. And so I understand why some coaches would want to farm out the portal as best they can and maybe lean a little heavier in that direction versus doing the high school thing, where, let's be honest, in a lot of cases, some of these same programs are at a disadvantage. That being said, you need the balance.
Yeah.
You can't go full Coach Prime. You just can't. Maybe he can pull it off, but I find it hard to believe that that's a sustainable thing for any great number of years. It's just really hard to hit in the portal year in, year out, year in, year out.
Right. No, you're right. And the interesting thing to me about what Brandon was talking about was like, maybe you're going here this year, but I might be talking to you again next year when
That's right.
the recruiting starts anew. And I hadn't really thought about it that much, but like the idea of a blue chip guy going wherever. Okay. So let's say he goes to Michigan State, Tennessee, whatever. And just doesn't play, uses a redshirt year his first year, clearly is not going to crack the 2 deep, but maybe it's 2 years of really not playing in any significant time as like a high 4-star safety or something like that. It's amazing the power that 24/7 or On3 or Rivals or whoever wields over even the second opportunity, right? Because when that guy who has done nothing for 2 years at some major school enters the portal after a couple years doing nothing, there's still that ability to lean on like, 4-star Tennessee signee. So
That's right.
The opportunities are still going to be there because of that initial reputation and star number next to his name. That's fascinating to me, that it's still going to carry years worth of weight, even if he's just a guy.
What a weird sport we have the privilege of covering here on the Solid
Absolutely.
Verbal. What a weird sport. Truly scaffolding on top of scaffolding, as you have said many times over. The final point that I'll bring up on this, and then we'll move on and wrap things up here.
Yeah.
If you're one of those fans that likes to tweet at high school recruits for not committing to your school, this is also a very bad time for you. And I say that because you don't want to be the fan base that jumps out and starts dogging Dylan Raiola, whoever, because there's always a chance a year or two down the line that things are going to come back around. And if you're that fan base that leaves a bad taste in the recruit's mouth, forget it.
Sure.
Forget it. So if you value any of these guys at all as future members of your team or of the greater college football community, shut the hell up. Just stay off Twitter for the day, for the week, for the month, whatever.
Oh, I thought you were going to go with like, it's never been more difficult because of all the moving pieces with the portal to know who to yell at.
No, it's never been more difficult, but I'm saying if you value kind of the future state of your program and understand the new landscape here, shut the hell up.
Right. Which is also why like the coaches are getting really good at playing the game, that they're not going to push so hard. They're not going to feel burned and, be aggressive towards the recruit that they chose this school over that school.
Lane Kiffin congratulates everybody these days.
Yeah.
Anybody who does anything, Lane Kiffin's there to give you the blue ribbon. That's just who he is now. He's a nice guy. Let's move on.
Maybe we'll
Let's go.
see in a year. We'll catch up in a year.
Some players are good. Some are great. And some are just dudes. Welcome to Dude Alert, presented by Pristine Auction.
So a little bit of a different spin on it this time around. Dude alerts have been very reactive, but alerts, like you said at the top, alerts by their very nature can also be proactive. Alert you as to what is coming, a winter weather alert, a storm alert. Let's do a true dude alert here with our information that we got from our good friend Brandon Huffman. He says Jeremiah Smith might be one of the best receivers he's ever seen in person.
Yep.
That would be the first. The second he mentioned was Ellis Robinson, the fourth, who is the 5-star cornerback from Bradenton, Florida, who has committed to the University of Georgia.
Yeah, he's at IMG in Bradenton, yeah.
IMG kid. I don't believe he gave us the third, so I'm going to leave it up to you, Dan, since you're normally the Dude Alert guy. Give me another name in this class, someone that you've read a lot about. I'm guessing it's going to be an Oregon guy. That's fine.
Doesn't have to be.
Somebody that you are into that we can add as the third member of our very proactive Dude Alert on this
as a non recruiting expert, somebody
doesn't
who
matter. Pick a kicker. Who cares?
I haven't cracked the film on.
Maybe it's a name that you like.
Just a name I like?
Yeah.
We'll go with, as a non-expert, we'll go with Aiden Breland. How about that? The big defensive tackle heading to Oregon from modern day. I think he's the number one player in the state of California per 247. Can't tell you that I have an in-depth scouting report, but I can tell you once again as an Oregon fan who has watched his team lose 2 straight games to Washington, if you have somebody who can collapse a pocket really quickly on the inside, that changes things. So I'm hoping that I'm very early in saying dude alert Aiden Breland.
Love it. Love it. Pristine Auction, the ultimate destination for signed sports memorabilia. You can get signed gear from all the dudes that played at your favorite team. So just going out there, type in Notre Dame, Penn State, Oregon, type in specific player names. They've got a full complement of fun stuff that you can use to maybe decorate your background. Maybe you're on Zoom calls. Maybe you're on podcast calls like Dan and I are. I don't know. Whatever you're into, everybody's got a setup now. You need to have the setup.
Got stuff.
Pristine's got stuff that you can put behind you that make you look even cooler than you already are. The bids start at $1. Just head on out to pristineauction.com. Use our code SOLID for $10 off your very first win.
Have you watched Jeremiah Smith, by the way?
I've seen clips. He looks incredible.
The reason why to me, it seems like such a no-brainer is he looks like he's going through a walkthrough as he's catching the ball over somebody's head and jogging into the end zone while everybody else is running at full speed. Those guys cannot miss.
They can't. And that was the thing. Like anybody who played sports in elementary school or high school or even like intramural stuff at college, right?
Yeah.
If you've ever gone up against an actual athlete, that
Dan
is the one
Rubenstein
thing.
type. Yeah.
That is the one thing you notice. It
Always.
is not that their skills transcend yours, which of course they do, but it is how easily they do it. It is always how easily they do it that sets them apart.
Yeah. Like what you are offering up to them in terms of competition is not at all interesting.
It's like Neo at the end of the Matrix 1, where he's just, one hand fending off Agent Smith.
Hope it works out because he's great.
Last but certainly not least, a 5-star shout out to Verballer Paul Burkett 1, who left us this review out on Apple Podcasts titled Mia Maxima Culpa.
Oh.
I've been committing podultery with another college football podcast, but I have realized my mistake and I have moved them into the friend zone. The solid verbal is still the one for me. Thank you, Paul. We appreciate that very much. We appreciate your support. These reviews have been rolling in. We would encourage everybody who listens on Apple to go on out, leave us that 5-star review and rating. I will read through all of them. I am committed to that. I have started taking screen grabs of all of them. I'm already falling behind, but that's okay. It is a long, cold off season. I'll read 2 an episode if that's what it takes, but I'm going to give a shout out to everybody who takes the time to do this for us and for the support the show.
Well, shout out Paul. He sounds legendary and handsome and striking.
Everybody who listens on Apple, if you wouldn't mind doing that, if you listen on Spotify, you can leave us a 5-star review there. Many of the apps where you listen to podcasts give you that ability to leave, at a minimum, a star rating. If you're enjoying what we do here, please do help us out by going out there and leaving a rating or review. It really does help.
Agree.
Dan, that's all I got. Big thanks to our good friend Brandon Huffman for another great year of his insight. We'll bring him back soon.
Yes.
We'll bring him back soon to talk more about this. Please do give us a subscribe or follow wherever it is you listen to podcasts. If you are out on YouTube, also hit subscribe to the channel. Find us on social media. And last but not least, verballers.com. That is where you can find all the premium stuff. For that guy over there, Dan Rubenstein. For myself, Ty Hildenbrand, thank you again for downloading, listening, and supporting. We will talk to you